Hi, King Dan here. I'm going to make a video on everyone's favorite topic. It's Jamal versus Lourdes, and this particular video is really going to be quite simple. It's just going to talk about the initial filing because I still hear people talking about the case without actually having read the case. So this video is just reading the contents, not really explaining any of the behind the scenes or other motives, just reading and explaining the actual contents, because I hear a lot of hearsay, none of which are actually valid if you read the documentation. The first section of the Jamal versus Lourdes case is the introduction, and basically it lays out that the sovereign citizen of Chungaguk exercises the authority and responsibility over public officials. So it wasn't a case based on an individual against an individual. It was a citizen versus a public official, or someone in a public official role under an artificial structure. And the right here is the right to petition for a redress of grievances. So you're having a citizen who claims harm and filing a petition to right that wrong. The public officials are obviously in the archangelic or the servant position if they're in an employment status. So as the redress of grievances kind of alluded to, this petition is to seek redress, to right a wrong, and the specific wrongs that it claimed is protection or a violation of the protection from harassment and abuse by the bureaucracy or an artificial structure, and then the clandestine acts of terror against a citizen with the intent of molding public opinion. So that's everything that was listed in the introduction. The next section of the case was the jurisdiction, which just means where is this filed? In this case, the complaint was filed to the Office of the Inspector General. If you understand the Chungaguk Constitution, the Inspector General's position is basically a public official auditor, or an auditor of public officials. And if we read the clause, it says that in the Inspector General, in this case Kukshin Moon, will investigate and bring prosecutions against any individual working with the government of Chungaguk, or in this case the artificial structure, including bringing impeachment proceedings against the president or prosecutions of individuals being contracted by the governments of Chungaguk. So the jurisdiction was saying, where is this being filed? It's being filed to the Office of the Inspector General, and the Inspector General is required, it doesn't have a choice here, to investigate if this is an individual being contracted by the government or the artificial structure and image here in this case. The next section was labeled Constitution Applicability. Hyunjin Moon, the second king of Chungaguk, released the Constitution on October 11, 2015. Chungaguk is yet to be politically and legally established. However, the principles of freedom, the principles protected by the Constitution, are immediately applicable to those under True Father's authority. So in this case, staff members represent public servants. It's a employment position under an artificial structure. And then citizens are protected by the Constitution. They're protected from harassment by public servants by the principles of freedom outlined in this Constitution. Hyunjin Moon stated the Constitution needs to be applied now and not only someday in the future. He said this in front of witnesses at the Chungaguk Palace in May 2017. So the standing. The next section, the standing, is saying how is this able to be processed, or what gives you the right to do this? In the preamble of the Constitution, it recognizes immutable and inalienable rights from God and the physical kingship of Christ. So Hyunjin Moon, the second king of Chungaguk, clarified on March 6, 2016 that people have human rights. You can redress your grievances with public officials, and staff members are public officials. If you see things that are unrighteous, or you see things that are not right with the public figures here, so he's referring to in the Newfoundland area, you can confront them. And then the last point is, one of the human rights of Chungaguk is the redress of grievances. You're supposed to be able to redress your grievances to a public official. So that's your right. So that's where the standing comes in, where Hyunjin himself saying use the Chungaguk Constitution as the model, but also that public officials and staff members are public officials. And you have the responsibility to, if you see something unrighteous, to actually correct it if you can. So the parties, the next section here is the plaintiff. I might use the word plaintiff further. So the plaintiff just means the person filing the case is Jamal Johnson, and the plaintiff is a citizen king of Chungaguk. The defendant in this case is Lourdes Schwartz, is the employee, director of events, and secretary of the World Missions Department under the organization World Peace and Unification Sanctuary, or WPUS. So do note here, again, it's important, it wasn't a Jamal versus Lourdes per se, it was actually a citizen, sovereign citizen, against a public official. That context is extremely critical, and is actually one I don't hear when I hear or listen or read people talking about it. They usually devolve it to an individual versus individual, but the actual documentation makes it clear it's a citizen versus public official. The next several sections of the case refer to the facts of the case. So it's going to be different sections with different groupings of different facts. So in this case, the facts are related to the defendant as a public official. It lays out that the defendant has a salaried staff public official position at WPUS, and that the WPUS office actually stated that the defendant is responsible for event management and to assist Tim Elder, who's the director of the World Missions Department. It also lays out that Hyunjin Moon stated on March 6, 2016, that she, who is Lourdes, is working with the staff, so she is a public figure. The defendant has a public email address listed there and a public signature indicating her job title, and that the defendant acknowledges her job title and role as a public official. So it's just laying out the facts, saying that Lourdes Schwartz is a public official. The next section of facts relates to the Facebook group as a public forum. The defendant created and operates and manages a Facebook group. This group is called The You See and the Truth, because only the truth will set us free. So if I refer to it later in this video, it'll just be The You See and the Truth, because that's easier and it's shorter. The plaintiff actively participated and helped grow this group, and it's currently the largest sanctuary-related group on Facebook. The defendant claimed You See and the Truth is her personal property, allowing her to remove and ban members or delete posts at will. The defendant also claimed that You See and Truth was an official site of WPUS, and she said, out of this site we have been building the World Missions Department. This is not a joke to me. So You See and the Truth is a public forum created and operated by a public official, so that the defendant's actions constitute the actions of a public official managing a public forum. It wasn't just a private group. In this case, that the Facebook group is actually a public group by a public official. And this next section of facts is the plaintiff's participation and banning. The plaintiff battled theological position on Hyunjinim's YouTube channel in January 2015, which included rough language. Hyunjin Moon expressed gratitude to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's willingness to argue against these theologians. Kukshin Moon also encouraged others to unapologetically assert truth in a manner similar to the plaintiff, Jamal Johnson. The defendant invited plaintiff to You See and Truth in February 2015 to help us. The plaintiff invested time and knowledge to the group to clarify theological positions, including inviting others to the group You See and the Truth. Continuing on in this section, the defendant interrupted the plaintiff's efforts to win theological arguments by repeatedly banning him from the Facebook group You See and the Truth. She referenced the rough treatment of others and the use of expletives, despite these behaviors being publicly lauded and encouraged by both Hyunjin and Kukshin Moon. Hyunjin Nim told the defendant directly that banning the plaintiff for his harsh language actually hurts the cause. He said, in quote, "If Jamal is arguing with someone and the other side complains about his language and you ban him for that, then you're helping the other side." The defendant continued to contact the plaintiff via Facebook messages, complaining about the language and ultimately banning him multiple times from posting. This had her effectively siding with and aiding the opponents of Hyunjin Moon and Father's theology. The defendant frustrated the plaintiff's sincere efforts by using the public position and power therewith to basically thwart the plaintiff's honest intentions. So in the last section here about the plaintiff's participation in banning, the defendant's actions actually contradicted Hyunjin's intentions to allow the plaintiff to argue and debate in the Facebook group, and her actions were outside her authority as a staff member. This constitutes the abuse of public power by a public official. The defendant posted reasons for banning the plaintiff, alleging the following. So it's a little bit hard to understand. Just bear with me as I try to read it verbatim. And Jamal Johnson do not post regularly in the UC and the Truth site. They came to the site with the only one intent to disrupt the site. They posted irrational accusations that are unproven, disrespectful to our faith community, and damaging to our work. So this is what Lourdes was saying, or alleging that the plaintiff was doing. In light of the plaintiff's contributions to the actual site, the defendant's allegations are irrational, unproven, and disrespectful. Another section of facts related to the defendant's personal campaign against the plaintiff. The plaintiff promotes and practices the kingdom mentality, which does not agree with the defendant's active promotion of the church mentality. Many heated arguments have resulted between them and others who care about this differentiation. The defendant sees herself as an official representative of the church, an extension of the kingdom, and thus any negativity related to her is not acceptable. The defendant uses UC and the Truth and other Facebook sites, her public position, and her reputation to silence, influence, and otherwise change the plaintiff's behavior. She called for the community to stand against the plaintiff via the UC and the Truth by stating that the community needs to stand up and make a correction based on a false accusation. She invited and solicited the Facebook community to come forth and speak up. The faster the two brothers will change. So she's referencing Hyunjin and Kukshin will change their mind once they actually understand what the plaintiff, in this case Jamal Johnson, was doing. But she used the public forum to create and influence the behavior amongst the other supporters of Hyunjin. The defendant used her public position to publicly falsely discredit and degrade the plaintiff. She says, I have not seen or heard anyone here that agrees with the two brothers. Actually, most people here are completely 100% against what Jamal and Robert are doing. So when a 1,000 signature campaign to oppose Family Fed's trademark of Chungaguk was achieved, the defendant reported victory on UC and the Truth. However, she also made a subtle attack on the plaintiff while praising her own actions as public official and her own public work. The defendant used the victory announcement as the platform to lead a large audience into believing one-sided allegations against, quote, some folks. A great number of people asked me, why don't you defend yourself against some folks? The signature campaign victory and the allegations are separate issues, but were combined by her to give credibility to the defendant. Continuing on, the defendant further mentions to the King and Queen, Kukshin Moon, and Tim Elder that my experience working here and develop the world mission as a public official, or she mentions these things as she's writing, as a way to using it to uplift her personal character in order to publicly discredit the plaintiff. It's used to induce bad feelings amongst the readers toward the plaintiff. And also, lastly, just as a separate thing here, using it as evidence against the personal campaign against the plaintiff, the defendant used her public position to lure a willing individual into collecting posts negatively mentioning the defendant. She claiming that the king wanted to see a summary of these posts, and that the individual also posted many posts on various Facebook groups casting the plaintiff in a negative image. The next section of the case was the defendant's failure to acknowledge the public officials are servants to the citizens. So the defendant's superior, Tim Elder, clearly stated that members of the king's staff are servants to blessed central families who are in True Father's authority. The defendant stated, "I don't see the king relating to him," Tim Elder here, "as a servant. He is a counselor and advisor, not a degrading position of paid servant. None of us. The king trusts his team to make decisions on his behalf, etc. I am not sure that being a servant is the main mission of our team. Yes, we are servants to the citizens of Chungaguk from 9 to 5, my working hours, and whenever my work require that I work late. I have the same right of any citizen of Chungaguk." That is for Tim Elder, Greg Knoll, and myself. And then the last point here is the defendant contends that Hyunjin Moon and Kookjin Moon, not the citizens, have the role to correct public officials. So she fails to acknowledge that the right of the citizens to confront public officials and the redress of grievances. Another section of facts deals with the defendant's personal communications as a public official to other citizens. The defendant wrote to citizen a private message. So I find this incredible that you guys continue to persecute someone, the defendant, unjustly. Jamal and Robert, I can understand they're capable of doing so, but you and others on that list? So she's wondering why other people are going along with this unrighteous or unjust persecution, or that's how she perceives it. The defendant wrote to a citizen a private message that says, "Jamal has a very big mouth. He has no reason for mistreating me." So the defendant's communications constitute gossip while in the official capacity of a public official. Another section of facts is related to the defendant abusing the public position to manage a church project. Hyunjin Moon stated that the plaintiff's questions at a committee meeting were legitimate, not personal attacks amongst the defendant or upon the defendant. The next day, the defendant started an email chain entitled, "To Jamal, with love," from her official account to several members of the church committee and referenced the previous meeting. She said, "Everyone is welcome to present a feedback or to join us. The only exception we're making is for those that do not trust each other or speak ill of our community members, either online or in person. That is not acceptable." She also claimed that the defendant also claimed supposed authority in her public position to remove individuals who, quote, quote, speak ill of her in person or online. This authority is based not on her qualifications or her willingness to contribute. So basically what she's saying is that she can add or remove people based on her understanding of how they speak ill of her versus the qualifications or the willingness to contribute to an event or an activity as it related to that community. So the defendant, who is a servant to the citizens, is a facilitator to projects, not in the master's position to privatize church projects. So what she was doing is privatizing church projects and choosing people based on whether they spoke ill of her or not. Continuing on with this particular topic, further included in the chain of emails, acting on behalf of a public official, the defendant accused and prosecuted the plaintiff by demanding, and I quote, "We have to address the issue of you disobeying the king's instructions." However, there was no evidence provided that the plaintiff was disobeying the king, and the email itself was actually sent to the king and queen. So they saw it, but there was no evidence of what actually was occurring. It was just hearsay. The above constitutes the defendant acting as police and prosecutor against the plaintiff in a self-convened forum before the king while in her public position. Without evidence, this is defamation and an abuse of public power. The plaintiff has been faithful and loyal to the king. The plaintiff is also trusted by the king, and the defendant's defamatory language, such as disobeying the king, caused harm to the plaintiff. Up until now, the video and the case itself laid out the various sections such as the introduction, the standing, the jurisdiction, and the facts related to different circumstances surrounding this case. And this section, the first cause of action, really is focusing on what's actually violated. What are the reasons for causing these actions? So the Chunga Constitution, Clause 25, has an underlying principle to protect citizens from harassment and abuse by public officials in an artificial structure or bureaucracy. This sounds familiar. It came from the introduction. So the cause of action here is the defendant's series of actions as a public official attacked the plaintiff and took advantage of the opportunities and privileges available only to a public official, and that these actions constitute harassment. The defendant abused her power and apparent authority to solicit the community to attack, correct, and otherwise change the plaintiff's behavior. And also, the defendant violated the protections required to citizens from their bureaucracies. So the second cause of action, or the second reason or the cause for this case, is the underlying principle has archangelic structures acknowledge that the principle of the sovereign citizen. So the sovereign citizen actually has authority and sovereignty over all archangelic structures, and it's up to the archangelic structures to acknowledge this principle that's in existence. And remember, if you're in the employment position, whether it's your daily job or anything, or it's a government, it doesn't matter. Anyone in the employment position is a public servant and is in the archangelic position. And in this case, the defendant, failing to understand the proper position of public servant in relation to the citizen, claimed herself as an official representative of the church, an extension of the kingdom. So she acted as a controller or plaintiff or controller over the plaintiff. She thought of herself as an extension of the kingdom, not the citizen being an extension over the kingdom, in the kingdom over the public official. And so the defendant failed to acknowledge the principle of the sovereign citizen. And the third cause for action has the Constitution lay out a clause that basically has the underlying principle prohibiting terrorizing of citizens in order to mold public opinion that benefits the bureaucracy. And any suspicions of these actions will be investigated by the Inspector General. So in this case, the defendant used her public position and power to manipulate information, including the distribution of false statements as they relate to the plaintiff. So these actions intended to mold the public opinion and were using a public platform against the plaintiff. And the defendant carried out these clandestine acts of terror against a citizen while in a public position. The prayers for relief section is one of the last sections in the actual documentation, and it requested that the host organization, World Peace Unification Sanctuary, declare that the defendant harassed the plaintiff, declare that the defendant failed to acknowledge the principle of a sovereign citizen, and declare that the defendant manipulated information in order to form a public opinion against the plaintiff. It also requested an order for the defendant to make a public statement on UC and the Truth that acknowledges the violation of the rights to be protected from harassment and abuse, and that stops harassing the plaintiff by abusing the public position and public power, and makes an apology to the plaintiff. It also makes a request that the host organization order the defendant to make a public statement on UC and the Truth that acknowledges the violation of the sovereign citizen and makes a promise to stay in the proper position as servants to all citizens, and makes an apology to the plaintiff. So really just declaring that these violations did exist, acknowledging them as it goes further. And then it also requested the host organization to order the defendant to make public statements that acknowledges that the manipulation of information to form a negative opinion against the plaintiff stops the manipulation and manipulative actions and just simply makes an apology to the plaintiff. So throughout this, it just really, the plaintiff wanted an apology. Alternatively, if the previous things didn't work, in case the defendant refuses to make such statements, orders that the defendant be dismissed from the current position. So an archangel that doesn't obey orders should be dismissed. And then also issue any necessarily disciplinary actions against the defendant. It didn't acknowledge what disciplinary actions, just left it up to the organization. And then ordered the defendant to submit further information containing accusations against the plaintiff, and then to separately conduct further information and an investigation against the defendant to determine if violations of other citizens are involved in order to properly redress and protect these citizens. And then to clarify by public notice the boundaries between the defendant's official responsibilities such that it's clearly understood and seen if public officials are outside their official responsibilities. So really, just to summarize the prayer for reliefs, it just wanted that each of the violations be acknowledged and then to stop going forward in the future and to make an apology for those violations. If those three things couldn't be done for each of the violations, then to order the defendant to be dismissed. But really, it's just asking for an apology. And then also it's asking for more information to further uncover and further investigate if this is a habitual issue or if this is just a issue between the plaintiff and the defendant in this case. If this is a habitual thing, then other violations of other citizens may have occurred. And it also requested that the official roles and responsibilities of the public officials be clear so that if your rights are violated and boundaries are broken, that the citizens of Chungaguk can and do know that those violations have occurred. So this is the very last section of the Jamal vs. Lourdes case, and it was just the verification. Basically, and I'll read it verbatim here. I, Jamal Johnson, hereby verify that I am the plaintiff in this action and that I acknowledge and that I have knowledge of the facts set forth in the foregoing complaint. I further verify that the facts set forth in the foregoing complaint are true and accurate to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief. In making this video, I just extracted the main points of every single section, but if you read the actual documentation, each section has dates, it has screenshot evidence, it has footnotes explaining further. It has a lot more information than what I listed, but what I listed is the core skeletal framework for it. And if you understand what I said, it's actually quite simple of a process. It's keeping your public servants accountable, and it is the citizens' responsibility to do that. On a micro level, if we can't do that, we can't expect a macro level to ever do that. And really, if you just look at the dynamics or the principles at play here, this issue goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where the children of God have the authority, and the archangel ends up getting jealous and wants to take over that authority and put that archangel between God and the children. But in this case, Jamal Johnson filed a complaint on a principled ground of keeping that archangel in check. And this is really a duty that all of us have to be aware of. And so that just wanted to mention that because there's a lot of misinformation about this. An easy example is that people say that this is a personal issue or this is a conflict of individuals. But if you read the actual documentation, if you read the actual facts, if you read the actual filing, this has nothing to do with personal disputes. This is a public official and a citizen. The rights of all citizens, not just Jamal Johnson, but in this case, all citizens have their rights potentially being violated if these types of actions can continue to further develop and expand upon without some form of accountability. So that's all I wanted to mention, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.